by two marauders, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing great. I feel like I might be a roach. How about you?
Yes, I'm all good, mate. I'm all good. Yeah, I feel that I feel like I'm being controlled to sort of make sure that the reality I'm living in is the one I enjoy or the one I want to accept. But we are into season 3, episode 5. Sorry, Men Against Fire. I'll quickly just give us our sort of little blurb. Future soldiers Stripe and Raymond must protect frightened villagers from an infestation of vicious feral mutants. That's the sort of the tagline. We'll get into it from then. And don't, as always, spoilers ahead. Anyway, so Julian, what were your initial thoughts then for Men Against Fire?
I have always liked this episode. And for me, this is a very good episode that kind of gets points for me for its message. That it is an anti-war message with echoes of Starship Troopers that, gets at sort of, it feels much more like an old Star Trek or an old Twilight Zone episode expanded to an hour. And it's got a lot of heart in terms of talking about the way that we objectify the other, and, fall prey to this kind of thing, and imagining a world in which essentially the military has used technology to that effect. And so I'm really moved by its anti-war message. What about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I really like this episode. Again, I feel that the pacing of this episode and then the end reveal, everything works. They've almost like hit a new stride by this point. But I really like this. I like it. It kicks into a couple of tropes, but I like the way they've used them for shorthand. I think the main guy who plays Stripe, Malachi Kirby, is very good. I actually really like him as a character. I think he does really, really well. What's unfunny, the person who plays Ray, the more sort of brutal sort of female soldier, Madeline Brewer. The only issue I had, I've seen her in Handmaid's Tale. She's a character in that, and she's very, very good, great actress. But it's kind of weird because I recognize the voice, and I'm just like, it feels slightly off because I know her more as just as a character who's a lot more fragile psychologically and other stuff. So it's kind of weird, but I do want to touch on her as a character. But no, I thought this was really good. I really like this episode. I like the message. I like the technology. This idea of this is something we've talked about. A lot of the stories have been either commercial use, entertainment use, or something else. I like the idea we're now getting into the military use of some of the technology that I'm sure this has got some commercial application in this world of this episode. This has got that same eye projection technology that we've seen in everything from the full complete history of you and White Christmas. We've seen this idea before, so I love the fact we're seeing this as like a military technology where they can see like maps and everything. Like it feels like like a computer game kind of thing where you're going to call up the map and you can follow it around and that sort of thing. So yeah, I love this idea. So yeah, it's cool. It's a good episode, this.
Right, and this is playing, if the last one played with virtual reality, this is playing with augmented reality.
Yes.
Which, again, obviously we have presently. And I was really won over also, as you pointed out, by the military applications. That we know technology often is pioneered by the military, and so seeing like those maps and seeing the way they interact, it has, I think, quite consciously those Starship Troopers echoes, but it quite makes sense to be able to, for example, draw that farmhouse on the ground in front of you and have everyone see the same thing. So I was really won over by that too.
Yeah. Oh, what was? Yeah, I agree. I think that's good. There's some good scenes when they're doing that, like in the their leader, Medina, I think is the name of the character, is saying like, right, we're going to enter. You two enter here. You do this. Like they've got it as a schematic and able to sort of like. I was like, that's cool. I like that. One of the things I said about the tropes, and you mentioned Starship Troopers. The opening of this is aliens. Without a doubt. Like, they talk up, they get up and they're like, we're going on a roach hunt, and I'm like, oh, this is like, it's another bug hunt. It's like, this feels like the Marines Corps out of Aliens. And I thought that was kind of cool, and I think I like the fact that I'm happy. Like I love Aliens, it's fine. I'm cool with that. And the character of Rey, the female soldier, is clearly supposed to be a Vasquez kind of sort of like a hardened soldier. She's equal to the men and all that kind of stuff. And again, that's cool. I'm happy with that. I just think, unfortunately, the Madeline Brewer who plays the character doesn't quite pull it off.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Which is a shame. She's good and she's fine, but she never quite feels. It feels like she's playing tough rather than being tough, which is slightly different. But
I would put it as sort of like she's more disturbed than tough, right? Like there's something there. There's some like trauma. She's so gung ho and sort of like over the top in her performance that you sort of feel like there's a little like glimmer in her eye of craziness, that isn't really explained by the plot. That I feel like, oh, she joined for some reason, whether it was, she's got a delight in killing, or
you almost want to find out that she doesn't have mass, or she doesn't have the extent of the mass that he has. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
That would be interesting.
No, they're like, we took your psych profile. You're a straight up psychopath. Like, you don't need this shit.
Yeah, you're good to go. Off in the field, out you go. So yeah, I should also highlight the technology that they call, again, like, this is another episode of as you said, augmented technology. This is sort of post-human, technology being injected into the human. This is called mass, and it goes into the eyes and stuff, or affects the eyes. And again, I like this idea. Now, one of the things, again, about the pacing about this episode, and the reason it works, is I think it starts to drop information in a more successful way at times than other episodes have. So basically, the story is there's these things called roaches, and again, like you say, you're dropped in. You have to learn as you go. There's exposition, but you've got to pick it up as you go, and you're shown things and told things. But these soldiers, I like the fact that they're in the Netherlands, which is an odd thing. They seem like an American military force in the Netherlands. And there's a village that has had the food stores attacked and food and everything stolen and parts stolen from different bits and pieces. And so they then have to go and sort of like track these roaches. And you have no idea what they are until they do find this nest, or this place. This guy's been harboring them. And then you find out these roaches, and when they are presented, they're like vampires from 30 Days of Night. They're very feral, they're animalistic, aggressive, got sharp teeth and all this other stuff. Like, they look vampiric. And so they have to be put down. They're a danger. And so you are on the side of the military for this whole part, where they're like, yeah, you got to put them down as brutally as possible. And again, I like the fact that this, a bit like with... we're getting that, but like that shut up and dance again, you're being presented with a position, like it's forcing you almost into a position to side with the aggressor in this instance. And so I like the fact it does that from a story point of view. And then one of them flashes Stripe, and his mass starts to play up. and you get his dreams. I like the fact they reward them with sexual or gratifying
Sexual dreams.
dreams.
Yeah.
It's all part of the mask. They can be fully programmed. But then the reveal is, which is, I think this is the important bit, that he then goes to do a further bug hunt or further roach hunt and comes across a woman and a young girl, or a young boy even, sorry, and then has to protect them because Ray is coming for them. But he doesn't see them as roaches. He just sees them as people. And then the reveal is that, well, there are no roaches. It is just people with, as they refer to it, weak DNA, and the mass projects for your senses for you to look. They look like this animalistic vampiric creature, and also dulls your senses so that you cannot smell or hear certain things. And I love that. I was like, because when he loses his mask, he's like, I can smell the dirt and the grass.
Yeah, the grass. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that moment.
It's a nice little touch.
Yeah, and everyone else is like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I've forgotten that we couldn't smell this. And so we'll go from there. But what are your thoughts on those sort of things? This idea then of the roaches being, this mass technology and stuff.
Well, getting back to sort of the anti-war message and the concept of tropes, this borrows very heavily from zombie movies too. They look sort of Nosferatu-ish, but they were told that they are like infected with a virus, and so we've had, of course, this surge of zombie literature, with The Walking Dead and other things. And I think one of the problems with zombies, and I think also to a lesser degree with aliens and a lot of, monster movies, is that they're presented as inhuman, subhuman. Zombies grunt. There's no saving them. There's no cure. Anytime people talk about a cure, it's not going to work out. And so it's a fundamentally conservative genre, right? In which there's an invading other, right? That you could draw a parallel to. That's Mexicans crossing the border who don't speak the language and are perceived as dirty. And Trump starts this thing with, they're rapists and some of them are good people. This sort of xenophobic concept of the other, literally turned into a subhuman form. And so you could make the argument that the zombie genre, in which there's no solution but to murder them, right? There's no living in peace, right? There's no we could just erect these walls and, give them some food and they don't really attack people anymore because they've got a food source. That's not the way zombies ever work, right? The only good zombie is a dead zombie.
Yeah.
And that's true also like an alien. They're very sophisticated aliens, but all they want to do is kill and lay eggs in humans.
Yeah.
They don't have any spacefaring technology. There's not an advanced civilization here. And so it's very.
Could I say what you said? It's almost. I think I might even be line in this. Is I know the only good roach is a dead roach. It's that kind of mentality, isn't it? And it plays it front. So yeah. Right. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and there's no communication possible, right? Yeah. Because it's literally cut off what they're saying and making a sound like these grunting, sort of noises. And so one of the challenges of those genres, I think, unlike vampires, right, which like Anne Rice and others can do and make them sexy and make them attractive, and they can be used to tell LGBT stories and stuff. They adapt well to more liberal themes. It's really hard to do these kinds of stories and do a liberal theme out of a zombie type story. And this figures out a way to do it, and to do it in a way that turns it into an anti-war message. And I think Starship Troopers tries to do that. But ultimately, you still feel like, let's get those bugs, they're murderers, but also like it's a corrupt civilization doing this, right? Here it's just, oh no, that corrupt civilization has lied and there aren't even bugs, right? This is all just genocide.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think, you say this about the othering. I mean, this is totally, that you mentioned, obviously, the idea of the Mexicans. I mean, this leans more into, and I think there's a reason, it's Dutch but like I think saying German would probably be too on the nose. So they've gone for that sort of European country for a reason. But when he finds Katrina and her son Alec, and like she's saying, the mass is gone, he sees them as human, and she's explaining and saying like, well, it all started with this thing's on, it was mentioned on TV, on the internet, and on radio that like we had weak DNA, and there was this thing. It's not one thing, and this is what I think is interesting. It's like it's not one thing. It's a lot of diagnoses. It's like, oh, they've got this, they've got this, they've got this. Like they are not. It's not a virus. This isn't like a zombification virus or something else. Like this is just their DNA is flawed, and stuff. What's interesting is like there's clearly villagers that live in an absolute like almost like a medieval sort of conditioning. Like I'm curious as to what's happened to drive the rest of society to this situation. And to require food stores. But yeah, it's like the fact that they're othered, and then they were like, well, we've got to stop this for the future. We've got to stop them from breeding. We've got to get rid of them. Like, and there's a character who's one of the soldiers, Leonard, who says, like, well, we've dealt with this in all the cities. Like, how is it we're still trying to deal with this in the rural areas? Like they keep finding areas, suggesting that there's bolt holes of this in more rural areas, but there was clearly like an absolute, as you say, genocide in more urban areas where people must have been absolutely wiped out in a wave of violence. So again, it's never fully stressed, but the stuff that's alluded to is like, what the hell happened then for this to be in this place? This is incredible. So I like that. But yeah, this idea where she actually goes through, and the language that's being used to me aligns them with the way that the Jews were treated in Nazi Germany, which I think is clearly the parallel I think they're trying to go for with the European sort of angle as well. But it works, like it works really well, and I like this thing where Stripe is just like it's a lie, like the whole thing's a lie, and it's that thing of. But then countered with what the doctor tells him, that Dr. Arquette, I forget to. But yeah, this idea of the others is like you said, it's this thing of the fact they're called roaches, which obviously is a cockroach, they're hard to kill, they sort of scatter in the light, all these other things. Like they've not just othered them, and they have denigrated them down to like the insect form. And then they've actually this technology has othered them through physicality and sound. It's fascinating. It's a really interesting sort of. It makes me wonder: did only the soldiers see this? It was clearly the case, I think, by the 10. So, what do villagers and normal people sort of know and see and stuff?
Well, I have a couple of points about this. One is you're right that it harkens back to the Nazis and propaganda videos of Jews scouring, of rats scouring, juxtaposed to images of Jews, and this real dehumanization, literal dehumanization that the Nazis did. But of course, this was produced in 2016. When Donald Trump is running, and those same tropes, that same language was and is used about Muslims coming to America, about Mexicans, about, you name it, whatever the villain of the day is. It used to be used about communists, and there were variations. Like, the Jews and communists were sort of said to be smart and wily, whereas obviously the roaches are not. But that was also part of the dehumanization, right? That's, partly how you can suspend disbelief and believe that somebody inhuman also controls global markets, right? It's absurd. But also, this is the era in which those same things are being said in your country, about the waves of immigrants and keep England white and all this kind of stuff, and so while the sort of paragon example of this is the Nazi dehumanization of Jews, we have sadly lived through and
Mm.
continue to live through, including, some of the hatred of refugees in France and in Germany, that parallel this pretty exactly in terms of the talk of roaches and all of that. And obviously, this serves as a example for why that's completely messed up and unacceptable and should not be tolerated in the civilized culture.
Yeah, the thing is, and that's the thing. Like, it shouldn't be tolerated. The problem, like I said, the interesting part of this though is when he sort of has his mask removed, and after the end of it all, and he gets to see this Dr. Arquette who talks to him and takes him through. It fully explains it. Like, actually, as a human species, like he says, well, the problem is we're actually too compassionate. He says, yeah, we sort of know that we know this shouldn't happen, and actually just giving it to normal people to do, it's too hard. Like, and he goes through these examples of, World War One, where
World War II,
people,
Vietnam.
people firing above other people and have been forced to then shoot at the enemy, and the impact that had. And he says about sort of, well, it led to better training, more conditioning, and that led to Vietnam. But we then know that really sort of messed people up in their head and stuff. Now we've got this, we can reprogram you, we can send you out, we can change what you hear, smell, see, everything. It's easier to kill something if you've dehumanized it because you're not looking at a person. And mass makes it literal. We can literally make this thing look inhuman. And I love that when it's like, but also the Doctor is a full believer, which makes you sort of think of these sort of like doctors of, obviously he's a doctor. You think of the doctors then in concentration camps and all these other things when they came up with the final solution. And this other thing, the same idea of when he lists off, they've got like MS and lupus and all the diseases and illnesses he lists off. Some of them curable today, but he's like, yeah, but it's still like they have a weakness in their DNA, and so you don't want that for your kids, do you? It's this idea of pure blood, isn't it? Again, it's pure.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I was interested in about this was, and I don't know if I'm reading more into this, because the idea of pure bloodline, keeping pure, is often associated with, again, going back to this Nazi ideology, is the Aryan race is very much sort of like, the blonde hair, blue eyed, strapping Nordic kind of Scandinavian look was very much things, and that yet our lead character is this black character, and that sort of felt an interesting thing where they're like, oh, purity isn't about race so much anymore, but they are definitely still othering people with these illnesses and that. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. I also think that it sort of mirrors some of the contradictions of these racist theories, right? It's very strange that Adolf Hitler, who was not a strapping guy with blue eyes and blonde hair, would idolize a Nordic type, right? Which isn't even dramatic, right? I mean, very, very bizarre. And yet you have these contradictions. And I think you're right to point out that character, that psychologist, by Michael Kelly, who I think is most known for House of Cards, playing Doug Stamper, the assistant, and quite brilliantly. And I think he's really fun to watch. He comes off as very smart, but you never really know. I mean, he's a true believer. But you never really know how much of this is really science and how much of this is pseudoscience. And it seems like it's all pseudoscience.
Yes.
And it evokes kind of the pseudoscience of eugenics and sort of measuring crania and stuff like this, in which these racist theories, I mean, we have, parallels today, are given a kind of pseudoscientific justification that then allows somebody to say, all right, this isn't, certainly in the case of the Jews, this isn't a dumb medieval prejudice, right? This is actually backed up by science, and this is logical and smart.
Well, what I thought was interesting about that is when he's listing off the things that are being classed as those, the otherings, that sort of thing. Like you say, he's a psychiatrist or psychologist. Like, he comes across as very smart, very calm, very level-headed. Everything he's saying is almost like, say, a nonsense, but like the way he says it, it's clearly he's trying to sound reassuring and confident. But the thing that came to my mind as he was listing off that list is how easy it is to add to that list. Like, it's this, and this, and then today it's also this and this. So these new people have now been designated as roaches, and we've updated the mass software, and now those are seen as, being undesirables that need to be killed off. Like, you've basically just sort of like you've got an army that can just be pointed at any one person or group of people, and that's it. They are just, like you say, dehumanized. It is based on pseudoscience, but it's also based on like the will of a senior group, isn't it? That's the thing. Like, it makes you wonder, is there an ideology behind this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple of points about that. One is just the historical observation that societies that turn on their own, as obviously German Jews were their own, they were fully German. In the same way, both of our cultures have had, purges of people who were citizens and non-citizens, but who clearly were under the state's protection and not treated as such. Just as refugees are under the protection of those they come to. There are international laws for this. Those societies inevitably tend to turn on yet more within the core constituent group. So, I mean, any like theocracy that started with going against Catholics, then starts to purge the, Protestants who don't believe the right thing, right? And just keeps doing it until it's overthrown. There always has to be a new other. I think that when I look back on American history, I see a lot of this. I see, the first Red Scare. I see, the second Red Scare. In the middle, you have, the anarchists, the war on anarchists, the war on, these Germans who are coming over with these radical ideas, the war on just the concept of the left. And then, we get out, it's the Vietnamese, it's, the communists, it's the Russians, and then it becomes, Arabs and terrorists. And it seems like, Saddam Hussein is the next Adolf Hitler. We've got to stop him before it's too late. It seems as if all of these wars and all of these, certainly wars, but xenophobic movements are grasped at some new other, right? Or an old other, but it's almost as if that is irrelevant, right? It's the other of convenience. And history is rewritten in order to fit the needs of the day. Like the fact that there were, or at least some Muslims who fought in the American Revolution suddenly becomes not important. The fact that the American Revolution was founded as an irreligious revolution, right? As an Enlightenment project, becomes suddenly unimportant because of the ideological needs of the day. And so your point is very key. But it brings me to this question you brought up earlier of technology and sort of like, how does this work? And so you're saying like they can use it on other people. How does it know somebody's DNA? Like if we think the parallels like the gypsies or something like that, or the Jews, right? There isn't really like Judaism is a complex example, right? Because there is Jewishness as a people, but there's also a religion, and there's no shared Jewish DNA, right? There, you can trace somebody to being like Ashkenazi Jewish or something, but you can't identify somebody as, my ancestors on my father's side came from Poland. You can't test Polish DNA and say that's Jewish DNA. It's all intermixed. Which is a complex thing. But let's say that you could have, could test by DNA. Are these mass devices scanning people's DNA? There's no evidence for that. How do they, is there a database of faces? Clearly that wouldn't be sufficient with children and things like this. So it's not really clear how this is done. And in a way, the fact that it's capable of being done at all does suggest some kind of genetic difference
Hmm.
that, in a way, undermines the plot. But I think that's a very minor quibble.
Yeah, no, I agree there, like you say. And there's a thing that say this: a lot of these technologies, like you're not really supposed to sort of ask how it works. But that did bother me. I was a bit like, because the other thing I thought that was interesting, I know it's playing in with your senses, stops your sense of smell, changes what you see, and what you hear. So it's got to be very, very specific, because someone can be shouting for help whilst they're being attacked by a roach, but you can hear the help call, but you'll hear the growls and the grunts of a roach. So that's two sets of auditory information coming in, being interpreted in different ways. Outside of a room as well, by the way, that should be clear. Should be noted that he hears noise and runs into the room. So you haven't even got to be within visual shots. So that suggests there's almost like a network of information going around this mass you're connected with others, which is shown because they are all looking at the same thing when they look at the schematics of that house. Fine. But again, the other thing is, when we look at like the schematics of the house and they get like some other sort of like information pops up in front of their eyes, and you have sort of Stripe popping his hands through it and stuff, which I thought that was kind of cool as well, to see that there's a depth to the presentation. It looks like a computer graphic, yet when they are looking at these roaches, like it's doing, I would say photorealistic effects or scrambling onto these people's faces to make them look like a vampire from 30 Days of Night. So that's an advancement in technology as well. Like, it's not a blurring, it's not something other or making them hideous. It's giving them a face that's recognizable, but is slightly animalistic. So yeah,
it's doing movie level CGI in real time, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. And I think the only way to square that is to think that ability of the math device to do that is deliberately being obscured by representing things as computer graphics and limiting the way the technology's capabilities are shown to people. But that psychiatrist could reference that, right? Like it would take a line of dialogue to explain that, and say, obviously, if we show that this can control everything, you would become suspicious, right?
Yeah.
And so for that reason, we've done this.
Yeah, or even a case of like, you get the pop-up, but like, that's we will show you pop-up graphics. That's an output of like, we are sending you information, but also it's pushing it, something into your brain. So your brain is actively filling in the gaps when it looks at these kinds of people. Like, it's not the mass that's which would be even more interesting. It's not the mass that's creating this facial feature. It's your brain, in which case the roaches could look completely different for each person that looks at them. They are looked upon as another, as a danger and as an animal, but like he sees them as these vampiric, growling things. Raymond might look at them and see something a bit different, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, this gets into some of the deeper problems that I have with this technology. So, I mean, there are a few other technologies shown. One is this sort of translator device on people's chest, which is kind of cool, but also like it's 2016, so like we have those. Certainly today we do.
Yeah, talking to my phone. There you go. Yeah.
No, and I remember being in Europe and seeing people doing that on their phones, and I was like, oh my God, what are they using? It's the first time I saw that. It's like, that's from Star Trek. But then there's also importantly, the ability to wipe memories. So at some point you discover that, right, that the main character, Stripe, has sort of agreed to all this. And the acting in that recording is brilliant.
Yes.
I mean, it's clear, like, he's a different person back then. He was younger and, less serious. And I think, yet still clearly kind of the same character with sort of the same mannerisms. And I thought I was really impressed with that sequence. But they clearly have the ability to wipe memories, and also wipe memories from like the last week or so, as the psychologist
Selective
revealed.
periods. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a whole different technology that they have. Um, and then there is this sort of green light device that short circuits the mass, not immediately, but over time. And I think that is actually the most annoying thing to me, because the only explanation given for it is that it really is a light that you're told gets into the mass device and acts like a virus,
Yeah,
like
it
working
projects
its way.
it projects a code into the mass, is what he says. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not very convincing. But okay, I mean, it's a little out of control with its technology. And to your questions about the villagers and whether people can see different things, we're explicitly told the villagers see them as people, but still hate them, which gets to like, there were a lot of Polish villagers, villages that when the Nazis rolled in said, there are the Jews over there, go kill them. Um, and hatred of gypsies was very strong, the Romani people, pardon
Mm.
me, so, that gets to the deeper levels of xenophobia. But I still wonder, like, doesn't anyone draw, like, nobody's like, draw me, like,
A
let's have
roach.
our right, draw me a roach. Draw me what this guy looked like. Well, they think they're roaches. So, but nobody in the village says, I could draw you a picture of what he looked like. Or, they were older men, like older men. What are you talking about? I mean, there are lots of ways in which this
Falls
could go
apart.
wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other one is like say when we um I want to get back to the villages because there's something out, so I will get to this point first. You say about the villages, they lose the food. We talk about the othering as well. So I want to touch on this point. No, they won't touch the food that the roaches have touched. So this is really building up to this idea of these are going to be like the xenomorphs from um Aliens, or it's going to be like the Toxic Avenger. Like this is going to be something really insanely sort of messed up. But the thing this has just sprung to mind is a bit like with AIDS as well. You talk about the othering of people, this idea of like, oh, I can't touch that because he has HIV or he has AIDS, and then like, but that's not how it transmits. That's not how it works. Yeah, but you've told me that there's something wrong with this person or this group of people, and so forth. I'm not going to touch that thing, or I'm not going to eat off the same plate or whatever. Again, this idea, this othering and misunderstanding of the way these things work. So I like how this is bringing up all those, just as a human nature, just bringing up these notions of these things we have. The other thing I want to point is talking about the technology. When Striper's in with Dr. Arquette, and he's being punished, and he says that you've got two choices: either reset mass and get it back to how you were, or you are going to go into incarceration and you're going to get to experience you killing those two people or two roaches again and again and again. Well, the footage that he is presented is the actual footage. So, and it's caught through his eye. So the mass is recording that back to a source and showing people. So again, I'm like, oh, so it's recording the reality and sending that back to a thing. It's projecting a non-reality or an augmented reality out so that Stripe's brain is processing something different. Like you said, there's just this levels of complexity in this technology where I'm like, I always think about this thing when the more cars have is like, the more it has, the more can go wrong. Like I know simple software tools that get used in businesses that have bugs daily. Like people are ringing up and sort of saying this is broken, that's broken, or like this must be like maintaining this for military and also like in combat, like not just flashing lights, but like if they take a bang to their head or whatever else, like how is this? Yeah, it just feels too risky, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, that sequence, and again, I really like what he says about the history of World War I, World War II, Vietnam, etc. I mean, all of that's basically right.
Yeah.
And there's I think, most people don't know that stuff, but, and that's important to understand. But you're right that, this does present a sort of problem here.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get past it. It's almost one of those things where I'm going to give it this again, where I'm like, because some of the technology I really like, this idea that this theme they're going with for the othering and stuff, but it does bother me when they keep going, and it can do this, and it can do this, and you're a bit like, stop adding to this because you're overcomplicating this. Like, just stick with what you had before, like keep it limited, because that was working. And I think so. I'm sort of having to give it things because I'm liking a bulk of what it's doing. A bit like with the last episode, we were saying that with, like, with the San Junipero, like I'm liking all this stuff, so I'm going to give it some of the stuff at the end. And the same with this. I agree. I like that video. This is where I almost wanted to see, like, why did he join up? Was this like, did he have a choice? Was he? It was just like, right? It's the same thing. You either go to prison or you join the military and get given mass, or one of those things. I'll be interested to see what was his motivation for joining the army. That was the other thing I was curious, because then I was thinking I'd like to see Ray's video, this Raymond's video. Like, what's her video like? Is it her going like, I want to join up to wipe out roaches? Were there people more like instantly willing to do it? I don't know. That'd be interesting to me.
Well, and probably they didn't want the Starship Troopers parallel to be so exact that we had like recruitment videos and and then them talking to the recruitment officers. Although I still would have liked that.
Yeah.
You were talking about this video of what actually happened, and I think it's a very effective scene. It really brings home the horror and the horror of actually killing people and the PTSD effects that inevitably has on a human being who's not completely sociopathic. Having said that, there's a quibble, a sort of annoyance that I always have with stuff like this, with augmented reality, which is the size and shape and actual actions of people, right? So, like, if you map a baseball bat, and onto a baseball bat, a fantastic hammer with spikes on it or whatever, right? That you can't have characters getting hit with the front of that hammer because it's not there, right? Yeah. They have to be only reacting when they get hit with the base of that hammer, which is parallel to the baseball bat. Okay, so I mean, this is a little quibble. And for the most part, that's not a problem in that Redux version of it. But then when you have him stabbing the guy isn't even fighting back. And, in the Roach battle, he's clawing, he's, clearly a threat. And so I wonder, is the augmented reality capable of making you feel strikes and see strikes that aren't even there? In which case, like, why does it not then go even further and have the roaches, possessing weapons that they don't really have and leveling them at the soldiers to encourage them to kill? I mean, that to me is a bigger annoyance. I don't know how much of a problem it is.
I don't think that's intentional. I think, and I thought the same, because it didn't feel like for like, and I kind of like these things when they're done really well, and you see a scene from two different perspectives, and they'll act it out, or it's filmed at the same time, and you see, and they go, it's exactly the same event, but seeing it from a different perspective all of a sudden gives it another another perspective, as it were. Like, you get to see it from a different angle, whatever. I like that. This felt a little bit at times, like, although it's seen from his eyes, it felt different, and it sort of rang true. The thing I thought about, because at the end of it, you see the guy sort of like the person he's murdered, head falls to the side. It's supposed to be a bit like a shocking, like, you killed this person, and it felt a little bit to me, and we've called it out with things in the past. Even off air, I think we've talked about it. When you're like in Star Trek, or you'll have like, or any TV show, and they'll be like, we have footage of that event. Like, I think they do it in like Star Trek 3 when they talk about the death of Spock, and you'll be like, we have footage of that event, and you go, that footage is really well edited and very well lit, and you capture
lots
all
of
the
close-ups.
lots of close-ups and all the right angles and all that sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like,
yes,
that's it. And this felt a little bit like that, where I'm like, they're showing him the worst possible version. It's not like for like. And then in my head, I'm like, is that on purpose, or was it just a choice to make him feel worse, or was it just they're just bad at continuity? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I mean, and it may be that if the guy on the ground is really fighting back, you might feel like, oh no, that's still self-defense, right? Maybe you shouldn't have engaged in the first place, but at this point,
Yeah, you're
you're
defending
really fighting
yourself,
for
and
your life.
yeah.
And you could still feel for that human being on the ground who didn't want to be attacked and is protecting themselves. But I mean, it's just presented in a sort of manipulative, like they're just lying there and you viciously stab them in the chest over and over again. And while I like the episode, I felt like that was kind of manipulative and overdone. And as you say, not like for like.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do, and that it does sort of stand out. But you talk about it being manipulative, but that does feel like in keeping with the episode, because it's all about manipulation, and we've seen how much they can change things. So I'm almost thinking in my head like they've made this. He's feeling empathy and compassion, and he's feeling regret and remorse for what he's done, and this video makes him out to be even more brutal and vicious than he actually was. Like you say, he's still, because he could still argue and say, yeah, it was, but we, like you said, we shouldn't have engaged in it. But this person that was, trying to keep us away. But at the end of the day, they would have killed me just as much as I'd have killed them, and so it was self-defense. But this video, say, takes that away a little bit, so it hurts even more. So I think I could read it as saying like they've manipulated it to hurt him even more, to be like, well, this is what you're going to have to watch on an endless loop if you choose incarceration. So I'm kind of, again, on that fence of going like, okay, maybe it was done on purpose. We'll see. But yeah, I think it's a good episode. Actually, I want to sort of think about the end of this. So the choice he makes is shown at the end. So he goes back. Like, he's shown this video and he clearly chooses to go back into the military and have his mask reset.
Well, first we should say that he has been having the dreams that he has that are sort of controlled for their sexuality as a reward are of a black woman who we presume is his wife or his significant other. And when the mask is malfunctioning, he sees many of copies of them, and
glitches, and it's just,
yeah. And so
that's a cool scene as well. Actually, that's where it sort of freaks him out. That's very well done. Yeah.
And actually pretty gutsy for sort of sexual content. It doesn't really pull its punches. But then also the psychiatrist says, we can erase this. You can live with this guilt forever in prison, or we can erase this. And, so that's the choice that he's given. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing. Yes, he does. So what are your thoughts on the end, the way it's presented at the end then? Because he shows him in uniform, doesn't it, going to the house?
Well, I am very confused by this ending. I am utterly flabbergasted by this ending. I think I know what it's trying to do emotionally. So he sort of goes back home and he's in uniform, implying that he has chosen to forget this, as it seems he would, because he's so upset by seeing what the
true events. Yeah.
And and this is sort of a sort of classic Brooker, sort of like cynical, like, yeah, the truth matters less than our comfort, even for the good guys. Okay, I get that, but then he cries. He sort of sees his girlfriend / wife, significant other, coming out of the house looking beautiful, the radiant sun, and that's a sort of ranch style house. And we see the reality is just a almost shuttered, broken down old house, and nobody is coming out of it. And he sheds a single tear, and that's the end of it. So I think that the tear is supposed to represent that somewhere inside him, although they've erased his memory, he knows it's not true. Some part of his brain knows this isn't true, right? And has been broken by this. But I really am troubled by this because assuming that he's really at the broken down house, right? Now we're left to believe that he's like, what is he going to eat for food?
Yeah.
Like he's going to.
It's become like,
I
is he like he's like with the Lost Boys? He's eating imaginary food and sort of like,
yeah,
yeah,
like the mass device. The mass thing is going to make him. I keep saying mass device like it's the GI Joe
yeah,
animated, but like the mass thing is going to make him imagine that he's having sex with her and he's kissing her and they're talking. It's now inventing a character and inventing whole conversations and all of this, and he's not able to detect it. So now we've got a very sophisticated AI running this, and he's going to be in a broken down home, which you can make look good, but again, there's no food. And also, there are things about a broken down home, like falling through the floor or hurting yourself on a nail or things like that, that you can't gloss over. And I find at this point, what they've got that mass thing doing utterly preposterous. The
yeah.
idea you would actually send somebody home to a broken down house and just make them imagine shore leave is, I think, utterly preposterous.
And this is where I saw this and I linked it with the last episode. And I was like, well, why don't you have, instead of it showing a broken down house, like show him in a bed using the San Junipero technology? And they're like, yeah, he's accepted he is back in the military, but they don't let him go off site. They actually put them into a VR world and then they'll take him out. And then he carries on with his work, with his military work. Yeah, I don't know. The ending is really weak. It sort of, it feels like I say, because he'll be talking with it, like you say, and then that means this thing's going to be generating answers for a conversation and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, okay, we're now into like full blown Philip K. Dick level science fiction fantasy. And I'm like, okay, this isn't what this started as. So I agree with you about that. The ending sort of, I like this idea that he knows, because one of the key things they talk about is about the taking the mass for the first time and knowing that you're going to have certain things forgotten. Because they say to him in that recruitment video, they say, look, you will not remember this conversation. And he doesn't. Like he says, like, when was this? I don't have no memory of this.
So they can research, which I love the way he's adamant, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because and he says like it was only 6 months ago as well. Like they highlight like it's not that long ago, and he thinks he has a much longer, almost like military career. So they must have given like a full backstory or whatever. So I'm fine with that, doing that sort of thing. Fine, you keep it inside that. But like I like this idea of willingness, because they say to him in the training video, like, you got to be willing. Like, we can't force you to do this. It's about willingness. And he's like, yeah, man, I'll do this. And he puts his thumb down and that's it. So that implies that when you see him in the soldiers, in the uniform at the end, that there was a willingness where he's seen the alternative and he's willing to accept the thing. But that empathy, that compassion still exists in him. And he, it's sort of still just looking for a way to break out. That bit I like. But then it's almost like you say, taken completely away when you do go, the rest of this ending makes no sense. And I'm like, you could have there's another way of doing this. Like, if anything, have him, like Universal Soldier style, just have him rejoin the troop, have it like he's joining back with Raymond and him and Raymond are back sort of like, hoorah, sort of like back on it. And they're like as if everything's forgotten and stuff, and then have the tear or something. But like,
see, I mean, I kind of understand the ending from an emotional level, right? Because, the girl is representing his kind of like emotional anchor. Yeah. She is the sort of civilian life, the only representation of civilian life outside of that Danish village. She represents what he's fighting for, right? And his reward, right? That he would do well in the military, presumably get some money, get some respect or whatever, and be able to have love and a home or whatever else. So symbolically, she represents sort of why he's doing it all, right? Especially in the traditional tropes of an action movie, a military film.
Tie a yellow ribbon, kind of thing. He's coming home.
Right. And so to have even that be taken away from him, that basically like his dreams were implanted, and but then, is, I think, emotionally right. There's a sort of like beautiful aspect to that ending that I think I can understand why creators would go for. But it just doesn't make any sense. And it
No, no, yeah,
really,
no, that's the
it
problem.
raises like, was she always alive or did
Yeah,
they create
no,
her?
yeah, you're led to believe she's just a fabrication because they talk about being a
Hmm.
dream and all this other stuff, and like, oh, we'll make your dreams really good. Like that's what you say. I see what you're saying, like from a creator as well, but you've got to say like the story's got to make sense. It's for me, it's more tragic seeing that. Oh, at the back of this, he's just rejoined the troop and he's back out on another roach hunt tomorrow. Like that's
Hmm.
more tragic. Like this has been forgotten and now he's off to do it all again. Like that feels more hard hitting. Where I'm like, oh man, they've done it. They've broken him. He's gone back out to do, kill again. There is no, there is no Roach Underground or anything like that. There's no Roach Railroad where they're sort of like he's able to join and become like the savior of these groups of people. No, he's back on. He's been reset, like I say, Universal Soldier style, and he's off to kill some people. So, yeah. Anyway, we are
Yeah,
coming
you
to the
you could
end.
see him literally killing people and, just hammer the point home. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
But again, I do like the, just as a final thought, I do like the message. And I think that message and what it's trying to say, I think you've elucidated how the levels of technology and the multiple technologies involved
just keeps
really
escalating.
kind of spiral
Yeah,
out of control here. Um, and there is, in a sense, of a wider world. What was this war? What's the rest of the world look like? We don't really know. Who are these soldiers? What's their relationship to the Danish people? We don't really know. So I mean, there are a lot of questions here. I'm willing to abandon them. I don't need every question answered, but the technology and the logic kind of really flies out the window by the end. But it has so much heart,
yeah.
and the performances really help keep it,
Mm.
at a high level. And I really enjoyed this, and this was always one of my more favorite episodes of the show.
No, I agree. I really enjoyed this one. I see its flaws. I do, and they are increasingly towards the end as things sort of get a bit, say the spiral out of control. I'm not surprised he doesn't just take off and fly home or something shit like that. This is getting like Matrix level silly. But yeah, but the rest of it's good. I think it's solid. I like as you said, the message it gives. I think the performances are strong. And I think just the way it's shot as well. I think there's certain bits that just look really cool and it sort of works in its sort of in lowish budget kind of small scale kind of story. So yeah, I'm happy with this episode. I'd watch this one again. Okay. Any final thoughts then for Men Against Fire?
No,
No.
I'm good. I guess I'm against fire.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all against roaches. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And if you enjoy what we're doing, please leave a review on your podcast catcher. And if you like us even more than that, go check out our Patreon, where we do all kinds of different bits and pieces. More episodes like this for the Twilight Zone and additional bonus content linked with films that we do on the main feed and so much more. Go check out £5 a month and you get a whole host of amazing extra content from us. But yeah, anyway, for now, thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and we shall see you on the next episode.